Hello. The main thing I'm hoping with this video is that it will resonate with a lot of people who can empathize with with the message I want to convey here, which is that I think there's something inherent in human nature that feels we always have to prove something. What I mean by that is that we all know that we can have strong views on different matters, right? And of course, some people are more political than others. Some people are quite apathetic, but probably most people, if you push them, will have strong views on at least one subject, right? So, what you find going through life is that you meet people all the time that, in one way or another, you find will have a different point of view from yourself. So it may be that in the place that you work, you overhear colleagues having a conversation. It may be that you hear customers, if you work in a shop, having a conversation. It may be that you get into a conversation, and then you hear some opinions you don't necessarily like. Now, I differentiate the issues I'm going to be talking about from cyberspace. I think I've spoken about that before, and I do feel that there's a whole different dimension with cyberspace. I do think, as much as possible, people should try to be honest to themselves. So the way they communicate online, as much as possible, should be realistic as to you know, how they behave in the real world. So I don't really respect, for example, getting really confrontational and aggro or even trolling people online, then being a complete, you know, or wanting to please everyone outside. That's a bit hypocritical. Um, there are other reasons why people have to assume sort of false identities online. They may be fleeing political persecution. I know of people, for example, who in various parts of the world have to assume a different Facebook ID because they're basically political dissidents. So there's certain situations like that where a degree of anonymity and a degree of, well, frankly, falsehood is morally justified. But what I want to drive at here is that we seem to have this idea, I know I do, we've all been in a position where you feel, I could have said that. I disagreed with what that person was saying. Why did I not challenge them? I'm sure we've all at some point, or most of us have at some point felt like that. There are some people who are always plain speaking, and they just immediately say if they disagree with something. And that's fine. I respect that. But I think most people are cautious at least some of the time. I really do believe that. Um, you get people who just they will just say whatever is on their mind without always thinking about it. Well, my thing is that it is a very frustrating feeling when you and the person that is most hard on you in those situations is yourself. You know, I've experienced that a few times where I thought, well, that person was dead wrong. What they were saying was just not accurate, or it was downright insulting or whatever. Why did I not challenge them? The truth is, on a personal level, and this is just my own feeling about it, the truth is, I don't always like confrontation. That's the blunt truth. I don't always like getting into a verbal exchange with people because I disagree with them. The reason being is because I do find it awkward. I do find it somewhat uncomfortable. And it's not that I don't have conviction in what I believe in, I just don't like it. And I can't be the only one. Um, so I think that when we deal with these situations, sometimes we get a situation. If you're like me, you think, well, was I a card? You know, I don't think I am a card, but I think there's times when maybe I do question why did I not say something. I know I'm not a card because there's other times I have spoken up, so it's not consistent. There have been times when I've spoken up. I stood up in a lecture hall where this imam was giving a speech, and I asked taboo questions about Islam. Lots of Muslim people there. So, you know, I know that I've pushed the boundaries. I know that I've, you know, pushed myself. But there's been other times I've held back because There could be other factors. It could be that maybe, let's say it's a work colleague, right? And let's say you get on with them most of the time, but then one day they come out with a comment that takes you a little aback because it was an opinion that you didn't think they sort of held. And it might take you a little bit back. I suppose you could look at it two ways. On one hand, if you really do get on with the person, it shouldn't be a big issue that you have a disagreement. On the other hand, you can never really know. Some people take debates more seriously than they should, so they then think, oh, well, this person thinks differently from me, therefore they're my enemy. And then it could create an awkwardness, which wouldn't necessarily be your fault. But so that's why I think sometimes people are reluctant to always challenge someone else's opinion. What we absolutely shouldn't do is put on a false front and, for example, agree with people just for the sake of agreeing with them. That is totally, I do draw a limit at that one, except with the exception of countries where you have no choice. Where there is laws in place where you will, for example, blasphemy laws, or in the case of Thailand, Article 112 laws. But I don't want to go off on a tangent. Um, So I do think there are times that we actually have to practically stay silent. There's times, I mean, if you went to a funeral, you were invited by the family to go to a funeral and you didn't really like the person, you wouldn't, get up and say, oh, by the way, he was very stingy, or he was an asshole. You're not going to say that. So there are times that self-censorship is not a bad thing. There are times that self-censorship is not cowardice and it is not dishonesty. It's just practical. I think dishonesty comes when you're actively going out of your way to put on another false front. For example, when you're pretending to like someone and you really don't like them. If I take an issue with someone, I'm not gonna be aggro with them. I'm not going to go to war with them, and I'm not going to have a situation, for example, if they were a colleague, where I never speak to them, because it wouldn't be practical. If you're working with someone, you have to communicate with them. So I would be civil in order to have that basic level of exchange that is necessary. Civility is not dishonesty. And I think that's something that's very, very important. I think we sometimes feel that if someone is being civil, they're being somehow false. I don't think so. I think it's perfectly possible to dislike someone's views, but recognize that there's a basic civility that makes things easier to get by. Now, I draw a limit, within reason. There's people that I despise, I would not be civil to. In fact, I would walk away because I wouldn't trust myself not to confront them. Certain public figures, Jeremy Kyle, Paul Dacre, and there's others. Because Munro Bergdorf is another one, the racist of L'Oreal. But anyway, that's not here or there. But actually, since I mentioned public figures, that comes into this. We expect public figures, especially politicians, but also to some extent other public figures, to have conviction on a lot of issues. So if a politician was to say, I'm not really sure about that, I see both sides, people would accuse them of sitting on the fence. That's a little bit hypocritical because that's how a lot of people would feel about a lot of issues. So we're a little bit hypocritical in what we expect of politicians because on one hand we say, oh, we want them or they should be like real people. Yet when they are like real people, we put them in the pillory and say, oh, but they're the ones who have to make the decisions. They have to do X, Y, and Z. Um, I think there's nothing wrong with a politician saying, "Look, I'm assessing all the information I have. I'm evaluating my views, and I'm not suggesting, oh, I'll get back to you. I understand people want to have some sort of answer, but what I don't think people should expect is politicians to have really hard line views one way or the other, and somehow that means that that's the only way they can prove that they are sincere. I think it can be equally sincere to be unsure about something. That's not insincere. It's just maybe how someone is feeling at a time. So, when you go on, when you have other figures on a program for question time, we expect to be opinionated. And that's fine, that's the whole format of the show. But let's say any one of those people was, on a train traveling home from work or private car or whatever it might be. But let's just say for the sake of argument, they take the London Underground, go home, right? And then someone recognizes him and said, why do you believe this? Why do you believe that? I imagine a lot of politicians would be like, look, I'm just going home. I'm happy to answer your questions. Come to my surgery, or whatever, which is the UK term for an MP's point of meeting. My point is, maybe we have to give ourselves a break, all of us, and accept that sometimes it really is not necessary to always counter someone's opinion just for the sake of it. We have to give ourselves a break and say, well, look, they've said that, that's their opinion, but is me giving an alternative opinion going to change their mind? Is it going to change anything really? Because actually a lot of this comes down to ego. What it really is, if we're being honest with ourselves, is ourselves feeling good that we've said something, that I've stood up for my opinion because they said that. But in a situation of someone just making passive conversation, does it really make any difference? I think it's different in a situation where you have an organized debate, such as a question time format or a debating society or something like that. Or if you're running for public office, of course you have to answer questions, situations like that. But I think in everyday discourse, is it really necessary that when someone says something we take issue with, do we really have to confront them on it? Because I find myself torn between, on one hand, saying, well, it's just their opinion. It doesn't mean they're a good or a bad person. We just have a different point of view. I'm just gonna get on with this. I've been in situations whereby I've heard conversations coming up, and sometimes there's another factor with this. Sometimes your gut feeling may be that you disagree with someone, but you may not actually know all the issues. So, for example, and this is me being absolutely candid here, economics is not my strong point. I don't know the finer points of economic theory and so on, right? I know the basics, but so whilst I'm opinionated, whilst I would consider myself a political person, if economic matters start coming up in great detail, I'll make a polite excuse and walk away because I don't want to end up looking like a fool, basically. And I think that's basic human nature. Um, so in those situations, I just kind of walked away and thought, well, yeah. That's another thing. We have this obsession with winning debates. Again, it comes down to ego. Is it really about winning debates or is it about just making ourselves feel good? Of course, no one likes to feel that they've been a pushover. But then again, it comes down to the discourse that has taken place. Is it a civil difference of opinions, a civil exchange of ideas, or is it about point scoring? Because we shouldn't underestimate there is a huge range of debates. I mean, some really are about point scoring. It's about making the other person look foolish. And the internet is full of them. Like, this person is owned. This person is handed their ass and so on. Excuse me for the language, but that is what you see. That is what you see online. And it becomes too much about ego. And I think that's unfortunate because, I mean, put it this way, people watching a certain video, let's say someone who idolizes Vladimir Putin, right? If there's a video entitled Putin owns reporter on Syria, anyone watching that are likely going to be Putin fanboys and Putin fangirls. Of course, they're going to think that Putin has won it. I've seen similar situations. The Chinese foreign minister, when he was being asked tough questions in Canada, all the Chinese nationalists were lining up to defend him because that's what they do. They're biased and they not really interested in the fact that the journalist has a right to ask the questions. From them, it's just like, oh, how dare they ask our leader questions? So there is a lot of arrogance at play in terms of debate dynamics. And quite honestly, sometimes I'm really not interested in point scoring. I'm just interested in offering an alternative. I'll be honest, there's times I do want to point score. I do. And I think if we're honest, most of us do. But there's other times I just want to I don't want to become an enemy of the person. I don't hate them. It's just that I take issue with something that they're saying. So there's a lot of talking points with this, but I'll close with this. Debate is very important. In a free, open society, it's an exchange of ideas, especially at a political and managerial level in business and so on. It's very important in terms of how things go forward. But I do think there is a point when you have to just agree to disagree, because in a debate context, there comes a point, like I mean, outside organized debates, when you have an exchange with someone and you think, well, okay, we're not really going to get anywhere with this. You have your views, I have mine. Take care. It's And I really do think that is the best way to finish off sometimes. What I don't like is I've made the mistake in the past of mixing alcohol and politics. Bad idea. You know, when you've been to a party, then there's an after party. Some people might be political. Things come up, you've had a few beers. At the time, you feel super confident. The next day, you think, what the hell did I say? What did they say? Etc. So I think that can be, it's a bit of a gamble. Anyway, I'll leave it here. Let me know what you think.